Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Jeff Stevens, the former business agent for Local 59 Musicians Union in Kenosha. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
Okay. How did you come to connect with local UAW 72?
Well, Local 59, the Musicians Union, interacted with them on a pretty ongoing basis in terms of organizing music performance trust fund performances in and around the Local 72 headquarters and in various other factions or corroboration between Local 59 and their membership with AFL-CIO, and then of course AFL-CIO worked with Local 72. So we worked together as fellow union guys.
Okay, and what period of time did that cover?
It was the early 1980s.
Okay. Okay, and when did you become involved with the Musicians Union?
Really, right when I was old enough to perform in a band, I joined the local, and I think our first gig was at a place called the White Lion in Kenosha. And at that point, bands signed contracts and paid work dues and paid membership dues to the union. And so that was just kind of the normal thing to do. And I went down to Washington Road and 7th Avenue and joined the union and swore myself in and became a member and played in the band.
Okay. And when did you become business agent?
A couple of years later, when Ben Strobel left, I initially ran for president and was not elected, but then they hired me as the business agent right after that.
Okay. And you said that you had worked closely with UAW on many occasions. Could you tell me about some of those?
Well, of course, we had Labor Fest, and the Musicians Union worked with the AFL-CIO, and Local 72 was always involved very much with Labor Fest. And Local 72 had their own picnics and their own events in their hall. And they always made a very strident effort to make sure that whatever music was hired was union in nature. So we would contract sometimes direct with Local 72. We would work with them on fundraisers involving events. We, as fellow union brothers, would walk picket lines with Local 72 and unify with them when needed. So I got to know those folks quite well, performed as a musician many times at Local 72, hired performers and orchestrated them to perform at Local 72 and with the Local 72 folks in various functions.
Okay. How do you remember Local 72 in the community?
It was a very wonderful organization, very in-depth in its involvement in the community, and its level of support of the community was ubiquitous in nature. They were involved in absolutely everything in the community of Kenosha because they represented more employees in the community of Kenosha than any other union or really any other business. So they were very entrenched in all things culturally, and in Kenosha, we worked together with Local 72 in so many different factions that it was almost like they were everywhere.
Okay. And you got to know some of the leaders of the local?
Absolutely. Of course, Gene Sylvester and our family's dear friend, Jack Rice, and had a lot of interaction with Jack involved in events and fundraising and working with Local 72 and Jack Rice over the years, and Rudy Kuzel and Todd Onstad and John Drew and a whole assortment of wonderful people that were affiliated with the union and working at the plant. So we actually one Labor Fest. I was the Labor Fest co-chair, and I introduced Jack Rice as the Labor Person of the Year. So I knew those folks quite well, and we were helping and working together in organizing. You probably know this quite well, Carl. Debates that were organized to be held at Local 72. So various candidates for office would come and participate in debates that were organized and mediated at the Local 72 headquarters.
Okay, and these people that you mentioned and other local 72 leaders were pretty well known in the community, weren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I think there's fewer people in the community of Kenosha that don't know who Jack Rice is than do know who Jack Rice and Gene Sylvester and Rudy Kuzel and all those folks were. They were a face of Local 72, and they were the people's connection to a very large corporation. And that whole Local 72 involvement elevated the community and culture of Kenosha, because those weren't just wages, working wages. Those were career wages that supported families in a wonderful way.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of those people you just mentioned, such as Gene Sylvester? Tell me a little bit about him.
Actually, through Jack, and I was at an event at Local 72, and it was actually a Democratic Party event at the time. And Gene was, Jack kind of took over for Gene, and he introduced me to Gene Sylvester at that event. But all these people, and I think the charisma of Jack Rice is what my takeaway is mostly. Everybody felt like they had a friend, and he almost had a Hubert Humphrey type style to him, where everybody in the community would be called your old boss, Howard Brown, and Jack had some things in comparison that were similar. He would say, "Hey kid," and shake your hand and put his hand on your shoulder, and everybody was his friend. And Howard Brown was very much in the same way, very charismatic and loved in the community.
Okay, tell me a little bit about Todd Onstad.
Todd is, he was part of the new leadership that came into Local 72 between him and John Drew. It was almost, I'm not going to really call it a rebellion, but it was a change in leadership and paradigm at the time from previous leadership at Local 72. And he has always been a working man's man, and it involved him enough in the community. Well, now, for many years, he's served in office in the state of Wisconsin, and he's been a very loyal public servant and a Kenoshan that many can be very proud of. So Todd, I've made the mistake in the past of spelling Todd with two D's, and he's made sure I know that it's Todd with one D.
And you've actually worked with him in the past, have you not?
Yeah, I played at some of Todd's fundraiser functions in bands that we were in to assist. And I believe, between him and Peter Barker and some of the other public officials that have run for office, I went door to door and asked people to support them.
Okay. You also mentioned John Drew. What can you tell me about him?
Him I don't know as well, but he was very involved in some of the events at Local 72 when we were involved with Local 72. And, mine was a peripheral relationship with them as a fellow brethren in the union movement in Kenosha, being with Local 59. But of course, we had interaction in the planning of the Labor Fest, in the planning of various events at Local 72. And we had definitely a cooperative effort when, for instance, if you take the time when the casino was a hot topic and people were voting on it, those types of efforts that most of us from our side felt were going to improve the community, we came out in force to support those endeavors. And those individuals that we talked about were all very involved with that.
Okay, can you tell me any specific time or event where Local 72 really stepped up?
Oh, without a doubt. I guess, when their machinist brothers in Lodge 34 needed them, and when they needed us at Local 59, G&H was decertifying the union when they were out on the outskirts of the city and getting rid of their union. And we stood on the picket line with them and we raised money for them. And there was a very successful series of what they called unity dances, some of which were at Local 72, and the participation of Local 72 with their brothers in Lodge 34 elevated the existence of every person that was on strike during that very troubled time. And it wasn't a short time in the making. They were out of work for quite a long time, and they had a lot of support from Local 72 throughout that process. My band Bittersweet played at the Unity Dance at Local 72, and there was literally thousands of people there, and Local 72 was leading the way to help out their fellow brothers. And they did a lot of that.
Okay, you did mention some relationship with the County Democratic Party. Is that correct? You mentioned?
Yeah, I was in the Kenosha County Democratic Party for some time and unsuccessfully ran for office for Kenosha County Board at one time. I think there were 4 candidates, and I think I took 4th. And each vote cost me about $3, I think it was. And but I ran against some very substantive people. Mark Midori, God rest his soul, and 2 others. And at that time, I was the corresponding secretary for the Democratic Party. And it was right around the time when the Mondale Ferraro ticket was running for president. And Geraldine Ferraro came to Local 72 and had an appearance there. And I was charged with bringing in the band for her appearance, and it was very last minute. She wanted a band that was supposed to play the theme from Rocky when she entered the hall. And this is by no means me cutting up on these wonderful musicians, because they're wonderful guys. But I ended up with 2 guys from the local playing the theme from Rocky on a baritone, which is undersized tuba, and the drums with Scott Bellmer on the drums. They were on their own, and they did a masterful job. But the Ferraro campaign expected, I think, a very large brass section and a very large noise when they came in. And they had 2 musicians, so they kind of elbowed me and said, "What the heck? We wanted a band. We didn't want a duo." So it was kind of a funny experience, but it was our first female vice president, and we were very proud to be involved with that. Local 72 once again led the way and opened their doors to the community to see this wonderful historic event. And they did a lot of that throughout the years. And all of it led to that local elevating the community of Kenosha. And they were always that staple in the community.
You'd also mentioned the Mondale campaign, and didn't they come, was there a primary or a meeting that showed up that you had some responsibility for?
Yeah. Now that was quite an event, Carl. I'll tell you. It was our first parlay into the caucus, and Mondale was running in a primary, and I think some of the other candidates might have been Gary Hart and John Anderson and Jesse Jackson. And the whole idea was to have a big gathering of all the people that would support the various candidates, and then they would establish a platform, and they would take that platform to as many people as possible and get as big of a caucus as they could in the meeting room, and that the largest caucus would negotiate then to get the smaller caucuses and maybe add things to their platforms to involve the Jesse Jackson caucus or what have you. And this was all done at Local 72, and the hall was managed by the Local 72 staff. They did an absolutely fantastic job. Only problem was, as you know, voting takes a while now to stand in line and stand in a booth and vote. This was an all-day process, and it was hot out and it was sunny out, and it was our first try at a caucus. Mondale won by a landslide, but I was charged, as I think Bill O'Toole was along with me. He was on the board of the Kenosha County Democratic Party, and Sue Decker was the chairman of the Democratic Party at the time. We were charged with keeping people in the hall, and it was a riotous mob scene where people wanted to leave, and that threatened the caucuses that were inside the building. So my job was being a baby-faced kid and telling everybody, you have to stay until we're done with this. And at one point, I want to say it was probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, everybody had been there all day. Senator John Maurer came up to me and he said, one way or another, we're going through the door. We're leaving. So I opened the door and let them out. And thankfully, we kept the primary caucus together. We lost a lot of people that didn't want to stay any longer than they already had. They were very dedicated souls that were there many hours already. But that was the last we saw of the caucus.
Okay. Looking back again on Local 72, and now knowing that AMC and Chrysler are no longer in business, and since then Local 72 isn't that active, what do you think has happened in the community because Local 72 is no longer what it was?
Well, I think that what you've got is thousands of benefactors, and the history of Kenosha feeds its future. And Kenosha is a very diverse community, and the love of their love of the working man and their love of their fellow citizens still exists to this day. And the precursor to all of that was this cultural evolution. And I think the primary element of that cultural evolution was a much better living that they could have made elsewhere had Local 72 not been in the community and existed. They negotiated in good faith on behalf of the citizens and made these wonderful careers for people. And that has fed the future in a huge way. And now, it's unfortunate they're gone. It's unfortunate that this very large manufacturing base has left Kenosha, but it's all part of the plan and part of the change. And I like to think about the positive impact they've had on their offspring, and they are benefactors. There's so many guys that were involved with Local 72 that are out there supporting the community of Kenosha and worried about posterity in a way that has really enhanced the community. I think you'd agree in many ways.
Okay, now you've been gone from Kenosha for a while.
Yeah.
And, you miss the community?
Oh, very much so. I love that community. And, somebody said when they run you out of the community, get in front and act like it's a parade. And so that's what I did. And actually, I owned my own company for a while, and then I didn't make it. And I had to go find a job, and found a job for a while at the Kenosha News. And then Kenosha News had some changes that they underwent, and I didn't make the cutoff at one point. And so then I ended up being shipped off to Shreveport, Louisiana, and worked for USA Today, and worked for Gannett for a couple of years in Shreveport. Then I worked for Gannett for a couple of years in Nashville, Tennessee at the Tennessean. And then I worked for Gannett in Augusta, Georgia. And now when I started eyeball in retirement, I took over here as a sales and marketing manager at Augusta's largest HVAC firm.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking about Local 72, UAW, and all of the impact that they had on the Kenosha community over the years.
Well, thank you, Carl. It's been a pleasure.